The night before the wedding, I was trying on my wedding dress when my fiancé spoke up, his tone completely casual. I helped make your mom's dying wish come true, so I need you to do something for me. Just deal with this clingy girl for a bit. When he saw me freeze, he added, I'm marrying her tomorrow. I want you there, as the wedding artist. She knows we've been together 5 years, and she's not taking it well. She wants her moment, and I can't talk her out of it. I stared at him blankly, forcing a stiff smile onto my face. What are you talking about? Didn't we already get our marriage license? The license was fake, Mason André said without a trace of shame. My identity was fake too. I'm actually the heir to the André family. The André family and the Carter family have arranged a union. My wife can only be Chris Carter. But Fiona, I do still like you. All that glamour gets boring after a while. Being with you is the best escape I have. As long as you behave, I can give you everything except the title of wife. We can keep things exactly the way they've been. He gently wiped the tears from the corner of my eye, smiling with a cruelty that chilled me to the bone. Fiona, choose wisely. I've got a wedding tomorrow, so I'm heading out now. She'll throw a fit if I'm late. So 5 years of love had been nothing more than a pastime to cure his boredom. Mason was right. I should choose wisely. Him and his child, I wanted no part of either. I stood frozen before the full-length mirror. The dress on my body was supposed to symbolize happiness. In this moment, it felt like a sharp slap across the face, silently mocking my foolish heart. Before all of this, I had always believed Mason was someone who never wanted to get married. So for 5 years, I had been the understanding girlfriend who never once pressured him. Then a month ago, my mother, the only family I had, fell gravely ill. Her one dying wish was to see me marry Mason before she passed. When Mason found out, he took me to get a marriage license without hesitation. He even got down on one knee and proposed to me in front of my mother. I thought he loved me, but it turned out this was just the leverage he needed to keep me in line, all for the sake of appeasing another girl. Lost in my thoughts, the shop attendant walked in with a warm smile. Miss Fiona, your fiancé said these two dresses would look lovely on you. He asked me to bring them for you to try. I slowly lifted my eyes and smiled, though it came out hollow. That won't be necessary. The wedding, it's been called off. I don't know how I made it home. I thought I could handle this calmly. But the moment I stepped through the door, I saw Mason's jacket still hanging on the balcony, and the half-finished puzzle we'd been working on together the night before, still spread out on the table. The ache hit me slowly, then all at once, a dull, suffocating pain I couldn't hold back. I sank to the floor, and finally broke down completely. I cried until I had nothing left. Then my mother called. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and pulled myself together before picking up. Her voice was fragile on the other end, but full of warmth and anticipation. Fiona, how did the dress fitting go? Show me. I just know my daughter is going to be the most beautiful bride. I'm fine. I'm just so happy. Getting to see you two get married before I go. It makes everything worth it. I swallowed the sob rising in my throat and kept my voice steady. Don't worry, Mom. The dress fitting went great. Everything's almost ready for the wedding. After I hung up, every last bit of strength left me. I collapsed onto the cold floor. Mason had calculated this perfectly. For my mother's sake, I surrendered. The next day, I packed up my art supplies and showed up at Mason's wedding. Mason looked at me with a satisfied smile on his face. Fiona, you've always been such an understanding girlfriend. My heart clenched sharply. Those words, understanding girlfriend, cut into me like a blade, leaving a wound I couldn't close. 5 years together, but we were apart far more than we were close. The time we'd actually spent in the same place barely added up to a year. Mason always said he was swamped with work. 10 months out of the year, he was supposedly away on business trips. I never once complained. When he vented about his boss docking his pay and bonuses, I quietly transferred half my own income into his account. Once I was hospitalized and needed surgery. I kept it from him the whole time, so he wouldn't worry. When he found out afterward, it was the first time I ever saw his eyes go red. Fiona, you don't have to be so strong all the time. You still have me. I never forgot those words. But the person who said them seemed to have forgotten them completely. Mason reached out of habit and ruffled my hair. I kept my head down and stepped back without making a sound. He noticed the distance. I saw his chest rise and fall sharply. I didn't have the energy to care. I quietly followed his assistant toward the wedding venue. The ceremony was held at Mason's private estate. Under crystal chandeliers that blazed like daylight, a sea of flowers stretched in every direction. The reception hall was filled with nearly 500 tables. The scale of it was breathtaking. And I suddenly felt like a joke. When we were planning our own wedding, Mason had said, "It's just a formality. Let's keep it simple. You know how I feel about marriage." I understood. I gave in, over and over again. No flowers. Scaled back everything. A small venue on the outskirts of the city. 5 tables. But now I could see his anti-marriage stance had been nothing but an excuse. The truth was simple. He never wanted to marry me. The deeper I walked into the venue, the larger the crowd grew, and the louder the whispers became. Isn't that the woman Mason keeps on the side? And she actually had the nerve to show up here? Shameless. She looked decent enough from the outside. Never would have guessed. She's the wedding artist? Some broke little painter. Like she'd ever step foot in a place like this if she hadn't latched onto Mason. My feet stopped moving. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. The murmurs slithered through the crowd and gnawed at my already shredded heart. I wanted to say something, to tell them I wasn't the other woman, that Mason and I had been together for 5 years. But I opened my mouth, then pressed it shut again. Who would believe me? The bride today wasn't me. That said everything. I endured the stares and the pointed fingers, quietly set up my easel and art supplies, and gripped my paintbrush tight, pretending I couldn't hear a single word. Then the wedding march drowned out everything else. Every pair of eyes turned to the radiant couple at the altar. In front of everyone, Chris looked at Mason and said the words, "I do." I steadied my trembling hand and painted the moment they kissed. Even though I had braced myself for this, a deep, helpless ache still bloomed in my chest, spreading through me like cracks in glass. Then came the toast. As I expected, Chris walked over on Mason's arm. She raised her glass with a practiced smile. "You must be the artist. Thank you so much for capturing our happiness today." I pulled together a faint smile. "I can't drink." Chris bit her lip, and tears welled in her eyes almost instantly. "Mason, I guess I'm just not important enough to her." Mason pulled her close. "It's your day, baby. Whatever you say goes." He turned to look at me, his gaze heavy with pressure. I held his stare without flinching. The pregnancy test tucked in my pocket felt like a brand pressed against my skin. "Mason, do you really need to make me drink this?" His brow creased with impatience. "It's just one drink." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh and said nothing more. I took the glass and drained it. The liquor burned a trail from my throat straight down to my stomach, and a sharp cramp twisted through my lower abdomen. By the time I swallowed the last drop, the final ember inside me went cold. The rest of the time, I got through it one agonizing second at a time. By the time the reception ended, I was drenched in cold sweat. I was about to leave when Mason's assistant appeared and steered me into a dressing room without giving me a choice. Chris had already changed out of her wedding dress. She sat there with her legs crossed, watching me. I pressed through the cramping pain in my stomach and held out the painting. "This is yours." She curved her lips into a slow smile, reached out, and tore it clean in half. "Fiona, right? I know who you are. My husband's mistress." "I'm not a mistress," I said, forcing down the surge rising in my chest. "And you know that." Chris's expression shifted instantly, her face twisting with vicious jealousy. "Mason married me. You're still clinging to him. What would you call that if not being a mistress? You saw it yourself today. Mason loves me. He married me. What does 5 years with you even matter now?" "I have no interest in fighting over anything," I said, looking at her with complete calm. "Once I've handled the last thing he promised me, I'll be gone." I was exhausted. I had no fight left in me. I turned to leave. Chris lunged after me and dug her nails into my arm. I cried out in pain and pushed her away without thinking. But before I even used any real force, she went sprawling to the floor. At that exact moment, Mason shoved the door open, his face a picture of panic. I stood there, frozen. I didn't. The rest of my sentence was obliterated by what came next. "Chris, are you okay?" Mason rushed in and pulled her up from the floor. "Mason, you're finally here?" She flung herself into his arms. Then she tilted her tearful eyes toward me. Fiona came to drop off the painting, and then she just ripped it apart herself. She said I'm a homewrecker, that I don't deserve to marry you, and I don't deserve to have our painting. That's a lie. The fury hit my chest so hard I could barely breathe. Mason snapped his head up, his gaze dark and heavy as it locked onto me. Why would Chris make something like that up when she's carrying my child? "Fiona, if anything happens to her or the baby, don't think for a second you'll walk away from this." They had a baby on the way too. The world went silent. A long, hollow ringing filled my ears. Chris leaned into Mason's arms, the corner of her mouth curling into a quiet, triumphant smile. "Mason, my stomach hurts." I noticed the gemstone pendant Fiona's wearing. It matches yours, they're a pair. As an apology, why not let her give it to us? For the baby's blessing. My chest seized. That gemstone pendant set was my mother's wedding jewelry, the gift she'd given me and Mason for our engagement. I reached up and clutched the pendant at my throat, then looked at Mason, silently pleading. But he only glanced at me, his tone carrying a quiet edge of warning. It's just a pendant. We'll give it back when we're done with it. Fiona, learn to pick your battles. I swayed on my feet. The nausea twisting my stomach didn't come close to the pain tearing through me right now. Mason stared at my pale face, momentarily distracted.
Chris caught it.
A flash of spite crossed her eyes.
She shook his hand.
Come on, Mason. We still have our after party tonight. We need to go. As she brushed past me, she dropped her voice to just barely above a whisper. Thanks for the pendant. And don't worry, I left you a little gift too. The next second, my phone rang. I nearly dropped it. Miss Fiona, your mother's condition has taken a turn. Please come to the hospital immediately. My mind went completely blank. The blood drained from my entire body. There was only one thought left in my head. I had to get to my mother. I bolted out of the room like a person possessed and threw myself in front of Mason's car just as it was pulling away. Mason, my mom's condition suddenly got worse. Please take me to the hospital. Mason hesitated. In all the time he'd known me, I had always been the strong one. The one who kept everything together and never let anyone see her fall apart. Seeing me now, sobbing outside his window, begging, something tightened in his chest in a way he couldn't quite explain. He was about to tell the driver to unlock the door. Then Chris's voice cracked through the moment, like a whip. Fiona, are you seriously doing this to me on purpose? Mason has spent 5 years with you. The least you can do is let him be completely mine today. Why do you have to take him from me right now? If you want to ruin our plans, just say so. You don't have to make up some excuse. With each word from Chris, the warmth drained from Mason's eyes. What was left was cold and flat. I already checked with her doctors. Your mom has been stable lately. Fiona, using something like this to try to keep me here just makes me tired of you. He ignored my cries. The car pulled away and disappeared into the dark. In complete desperation, I bit through the pain and walked. 3 hours. It took me 3 full hours to reach the hospital on foot. When I finally got there, I understood what Chris had meant by her gift. She had posted about me online, spreading the story that I was Mason's mistress. A headline was already trending. André family and Carter family unite in matrimony. Mistress Fiona causes scene at wedding. My mother had seen it. The shock and distress sent her into a collapse. By some miracle, the doctors had been able to stabilize her. In the hospital room, my mother stroked my hair gently, her voice thin and tired. Fiona, I believe you. I'm not falling for those rumors. But did you and Mason actually break up? Did he do something to hurt you? I blinked back the tide rising behind my eyes and smiled for her. Those articles are all lies. The wedding is still happening. Everything's fine between us, Mom. I promise. So you need to focus on getting better. She nodded with relief and, as though the effort had used up everything she had left, drifted back into sleep. I walked out of her room and slid down the cold wall until I was sitting on the floor. In the quiet of the hallway, the only sounds were my tears hitting the tile and the muffled sobs I pressed behind my hands. The next morning, I sent Mason a message. I asked him, for the sake of everything we had shared, to help me one last time. I never got a reply from him. Instead, Chris showed up, furious and spoiling for a fight. She stood outside my mother's hospital room, arms crossed, staring down at me with contempt. You pathetic little thing. I knew you'd go crawling back to Mason behind my back. Let me ask your mother how she managed to raise a daughter like you. I threw myself in front of the door, but her bodyguards seized me before I could stop her. My mother heard the commotion and forced herself up to open the door. Let go of her. You have no right to treat my daughter like this. Seeing me being held back, she rushed toward us with everything she had left. But a single sentence from Chris stopped her cold. Your daughter broke up my marriage. Are you saying she doesn't deserve what she gets? My mother stumbled backward. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then she fell. No, the scream tore out of me. I wrenched free and threw myself to her side. The medical team came running. After everything they tried, the doctor turned to me and shook his head. The strength went out of my legs. I crumpled to the ground. Then the doctor's face went pale and he rushed toward me. That was when I felt it, a crushing weight low in my abdomen and the warmth of blood spreading beneath me. That day, I lost the 2 most important people in my life at the same time. My mother, who had loved me more than anyone, and my baby 2 months along. I was lying in the recovery bed after surgery when Mason's message finally came through. Fiona, what is wrong with you? Chris told me she went out of her way to bring a specialist to see your mother today, and you wouldn't let her in, and then you hit her? You actually broke the skin on her hand. Look, she's pregnant, and she doesn't need this kind of stress. I'm going to take her somewhere to decompress. I'll be at the wedding on Saturday as agreed. I didn't reply. I blocked him on everything. Before I left, I arranged a simple funeral for my mother. Then I went home and packed. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't touched in over a year. The next day, I boarded a flight to England. Toward the future I had once given up for him. Mason, this is my choice. We will not meet again. The rain in London did not fall in torrents. It misted, a persistent, freezing gray shroud that clung to the limestone of the terminal exit. Fiona pulled her trench coat tighter around her shoulders. She carried only a single suitcase and her leather portfolio. Inside the portfolio were no sketches of bright, happy weddings, only raw, charcoal studies of empty rooms and hands reaching for things that weren't there. A sleek, black Bentley was idling near the curb, its hazard lights blinking rhythmically against the damp tarmac. As Fiona approached, a chauffeur in a charcoal gray suit quickly stepped out, holding a large umbrella. Miss Vance? The man asked, his voice low and respectful. Fiona nodded slightly.
Yes.
Thank you, Thomas. Your grandfather is waiting for you at the estate, Mississippi. He was deeply grieved to hear about your mother. Thomas opened the door, shielding her from the mist. Fiona climbed into the leather-scented warmth of the vehicle. She leaned her head against the cool window, watching the neon signs of Heathrow fade into the bleak English countryside. For 5 years, she had lived as Fiona Lane, a struggling freelance artist in a cramped, humid apartment, skipping meals to buy paint and transferring her savings to a man who claimed his boss was docking his pay. She had hidden her true identity, Fiona Vance, the sole heiress to the Vance Group, one of the most formidable names in European shipping and art patronage, because she had believed in a simple, honest love. Her mother, Beatrice, had fled the family decades ago to marry for love, a choice that had ended in quiet poverty, but no regrets. Fiona had wanted to prove to herself and to her mother that she could find the same devotion. Instead, she had found Mason André, the memory of the hospital corridor, the cold tile against her knees, and the sticky, warm blood soaking through her clothes flared in her mind like a fresh burn. She closed her eyes, her hand instinctively resting on her flat stomach. The baby had been 8 weeks old. A tiny heartbeat, extinguished before it could even begin, chased away by the stress of her mother's sudden collapse and Chris Carter's cruel words. "We are here, Miss Vance," Thomas said softly, pulling the car to a stop. Before her stood Vance Manor, a sprawling Jacobean estate surrounded by manicured hedges and ancient oaks. At the grand double doors stood Julian Vance. At 76, his hair was stark white, but his posture was as rigid as iron. As Fiona stepped out of the car, the old man took a slow, heavy step forward.
He
Looked at her pale face, her hollow eyes, and the sheer exhaustion radiating
from her small frame.
"Fiona," Julian said, his voice cracking with a rare flicker of emotion.
My
"Child." "Grandfather," Fiona whispered. She did not cry. The tears had dried up somewhere over the Siberian airspace. She simply walked into his arms. The old man held her tightly, his hand resting on the back of her head. "You are home," Julian murmured. "The people who did this to you, they will learn what it means to cross a Vance. But first, you must heal." "I don't want revenge yet, grandfather," Fiona said, her voice deadened, looking up at the gray sky. "I want to paint. I want to paint until I don't feel anything at all." In Shanghai, the autumn air was thick and stagnant. Mason André sat at the mahogany desk in his newly renovated office at the André Group headquarters. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit, but his tie felt suffocatingly tight. His phone sat on the desk, dark and silent. It had been 3 days since he sent Fiona that text message. He had expected her to reply with her usual quiet, accommodating tone. He expected her to apologize for misunderstanding Chris, to tell him she was ready to talk, and to ask when he was coming over. But there was nothing. No text, no call. When he had tried to call her the previous night, a robotic voice informed him that his number had been blocked. When he sent an assistant to her apartment, the landlord reported that the unit had been vacated, the keys returned, and the remaining furniture left behind to be discarded. Mason, darling, are you listening to me? Chris Carter walked into the office, her high heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She was wearing a silk Chanel dress, her fingers sparkling with the massive diamond engagement ring he had bought her. Around her neck, catching the morning light, was the gemstone pendant, the one Fiona's mother had given her. Mason's chest tightened slightly as he looked at the pendant. Chris, where did you get that? What this? Chris touched the pendant, smiling carelessly. I told you Fiona gave it to us as a blessing for the baby. It's a bit old-fashioned, but it matches your family crest nicely, doesn't it? Mason frowned. Fiona cherished that. It was her mother's. Well, she knew she had to make amends, Chris said, her voice turning sharp, her eyes narrowing. After the scene she caused at our wedding? And then she had the nerve to attack me when I tried to bring a medical specialist to her mother. My hand still hurts where she scratched me. Chris held up her delicate wrist, where a faint, barely visible red mark remained. Mason sighed, rubbing his temples.
I know.
She's been under a lot of pressure. Her mother's health hasn't been good. Well, she's gone now anyway, Chris said, swirling her designer handbag.
I
Heard from my friends in the hospital administration that her mother passed away the morning after our wedding. Heart failure. Quite sad, really, but at least now Fiona doesn't have any excuse to keep dragging you into her family drama. Mason froze. His hand dropped from his forehead. What did you say? Her mother died, Chris repeated, her tone entirely devoid of empathy. Honestly, it's a blessing in disguise. That woman was a financial drain, and now Fiona can finally move on and find someone of her own social class. The room seemed to lose its air. Mason stood up, so quickly his chair scraped violently against the floor. Beatrice was dead? The image of Fiona standing outside his car window, sobbing, begging him to take her to the hospital, flashed before his eyes. Mason, my mom's condition suddenly got worse. Please take me to the hospital. And he had told her he was tired of her. He had accused her of lying to keep him by his side. He had rolled up the window and driven away to attend an after-party. Mason? What's wrong with you? Chris asked, taking a step back, startled by the sudden fury in his expression. Why didn't you tell me? Mason demanded, his voice dangerously low. You said you checked with her doctors. You said she was stable. She was stable. Chris lied quickly, her voice rising in defensive panic.
How?
Was I supposed to know she'd suddenly collapse? Besides, why do you care so much? She was just a commoner. You're married to me now, Mason. Our families have merged. The André Group stock is up 15% because of our union. Are you really going to ruin our mourning over some dead old woman and a girl who was nothing more than your mistress? She wasn't my mistress. Mason roared, slamming his hand on the desk.
Chris flinched.
She had never seen Mason raise his voice like this. For 5 years, he had been the calm, indulgent, slightly detached partner. Don't raise your voice at me, Chris hissed, her face contorting with venom. Remember who got your family the European shipping contract. The Carter family can pull out of the joint venture just as quickly as we signed it.
If you want
to keep your precious CEO title, you'll remember who your wife is. She spun on her heel and marched out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Mason sank back into his chair, his heart hammering against his ribs. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. He looked at the half-finished puzzle on his desk, a small piece he had taken from Fiona's apartment weeks ago, intending to finish it with her. A sudden, terrible realization began to bloom in his chest. He picked up his personal phone and dialed his private investigator. Find Fiona.
Lane.
I don't care how much it costs or what resources you have to use.
Find
her. 3 years passed. In the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, the seasons changed in a quiet, orderly
dance.
Fiona's studio was a converted stone barn with massive skylights that let in the soft, northern English light. She stood before a canvas that stretched 10 feet wide. She wore a pair of paint-splattered overalls, her dark hair tied back in a loose, messy bun.
She
was thinner than she had been 3 years ago, her features more defined, her gaze sharper and entirely devoid of the soft, accommodating vulnerability that had once defined her. On the canvas was a masterpiece of shadow and light. It depicted a woman standing at the edge of a violent, gray ocean. In her hands she held a torn canvas, and at her feet, half submerged in the foam, was a delicate gemstone
pendant.
The ocean waves were painted with such raw, aggressive texture that they seemed to roar out of the frame. It was titled The Reckoning. "It's your finest work yet, Fiona," a voice said from the doorway. Fiona didn't turn around. She carefully wiped her brush on a rag.
It's
"Finished, grandfather." Julian Vance walked into the studio, leaning slightly on his silver-headed cane. He looked at the painting, his eyes shining with pride and a deep, lingering sorrow for what his granddaughter had endured to produce such art. "The London Royal Academy has finalized the details for your solo exhibition," Julian said. "They're calling it the Silent Years. Every major collector, gallery owner, and aristocrat in Europe will be there. And," he paused, his eyes turning cold, "I have personally ensured that invitations were sent to the André group and the Carter family." Fiona's hand paused on the rag. "Are they coming?" "The André group is desperate," Julian replied with a thin, mocking smile. "Over the last 2 years, their domestic market has saturated, and their joint ventures with the Carters have begun to fray. They have been trying to secure a foothold in the European shipping lanes, specifically the routes owned by the Vance Group. They believe that attending a high-society art exhibition hosted by the Vance family is the key to gaining an audience with me." "And Mason?" Fiona asked. Her voice was flat, empty of any emotion. The name no longer caused her heart to clench. It was merely a word, a historical footnote, in a life she had long since left behind. "He is the CEO now," Julian said. "He and his wife, Chris, will be arriving in London tomorrow. They have no idea that the artist Effie is the woman they trampled on." Fiona walked over to the window, looking out at the green hills. "They stole my mother's pendant, grandfather. They took her dignity, and they took my child's chance to see the world." She turned back to Julian, her eyes as cold as the North Sea. "It's time to collect the debt." The gallery at the Royal Academy was bathed in soft, golden light. Violin music drifted through the air, mingling with the quiet chatter of London's elite, who moved from canvas to canvas in hushed reverence. The exhibition, The Silent Years by the mysterious artist Effie, had been the talk of the art world for months. The artist had never shown her face, never granted an interview, yet her paintings had already sold for record-breaking prices at Sotheby's. Mason André stood in the center of the gallery, a glass of champagne in his hand. The last 3 years had not been kind to him. Though he was CEO, the pressure was suffocating. His marriage to Chris was a hollow, toxic prison. Within a year of their wedding, the truth about her pregnancy had come out. There had been no baby. She had faked the medical reports to force the marriage, a revelation that had shattered whatever remained of Mason's respect for her. But because of the delicate financial ties between the André and Carter families, he could not divorce her without destroying his own company. "Mason, look at this one," Chris said, tugging at his sleeve. She was dripping in diamonds, her face heavily made up to hide the premature lines of bitterness and stress. "The texture is incredible," Chris whispered, trying to sound sophisticated. "If we buy this, the Vance family will surely grant us a meeting. I heard the old patriarch, Julian Vance, is personally attending tonight." Mason didn't hear her. He was staring at a painting titled The Fake License. The painting depicted a man and a woman standing in a dimly lit registry office. The man was handing the woman a document, but the document was translucent, revealing a chaotic web of lies and thorns beneath the surface. The woman's face was obscured, but her posture, the slight, trusting tilt of her head, sent a sudden, violent jolt through Mason's chest. It was Fiona. His breath hitched. He stepped closer, his heart starting to race. He looked at the details. The man in the painting wore a ring that bore a striking resemblance to the André family crest. "What is this?" Mason muttered, his voice trembling. "What's wrong with you?" Chris asked, frowning. "It's just a painting. Honestly, it's a bit depressing. Let's look at the main piece over there." Everyone is crowding around it. She pulled him toward the far wall of the gallery, where a massive velvet curtain had just been drawn back to reveal the centerpiece of the exhibition, The Reckoning. A crowd of wealthy patrons stood in awe. Mason pushed his way to the front, his eyes scanning the canvas. The woman standing at the edge of the ocean, the torn canvas in her hand, and there, painted with meticulous, agonizing detail at the bottom of the frame, half submerged in the cold, gray water, was a gemstone pendant. Mason's glass of champagne slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished wood floor. The sound startled the nearby patrons, but Mason didn't care. He was staring at the pendant in the painting, then slowly turned his head to look at the pendant resting on Chris's collarbone. They were identical, down to the tiny, unique flaw in the emerald setting. No, Mason whispered, his face turning entirely pale. No, it can't be. Mason, you clumsy fool. You got champagne on my shoes. Chris hissed, stepping back. Where did you get that pendant, Chris? Mason asked, his voice shaking violently as he grabbed her arm. I told you. Fiona gave. Liar. Mason roared, causing the entire gallery to fall completely silent. The violin music stopped. Hundreds of pairs of eyes turned toward them. Mason, have you lost your mind? Chris whispered, her face turning red with embarrassment. Release me. You stole it, Mason said, his voice cracking with a terrifying mixture of horror and realization. You stole her mother's pendant. You lied to me about her mother's condition. You lied to me about your pregnancy. You destroyed her. And what if I did? Chris whispered back, her eyes flashing with vicious spite, realizing she could no longer play the victim. She was a nobody, Mason.
A
Pathetic, penniless painter who thought she could climb into high society.
I did.
What was necessary to secure our future? And you went along with it. You drove away and left her. You're just as guilty as I am. Is that so, Mrs. André? A calm, clear voice cut through the silence of the gallery. The crowd parted. Walking down the center of the room was a woman. She wore a stunning, backless gown of midnight blue silk. Her dark hair was styled in elegant waves, and her posture was regal, carrying the effortless grace of old money. Mason's breath caught in his throat. Fiona, he breathed. She looked different. The soft, fragile girl who had wept on his floor, who had quietly transferred her savings to his account, was gone. Standing before him was a woman of immense power, her eyes cold, calculating, and entirely untouched by his presence. Fiona? You're the artist? Chris gasped, her face twisting with disbelief.
How?
You're just a broke little. Silence. A powerful voice boomed. Julian Vance stepped forward, flanked by 4 towering security guards. He stood beside Fiona, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. Let me introduce my granddaughter, Julian said, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Fiona Vance, the sole heiress to the Vance Group and the most celebrated artist of her generation. A collective murmur went through the crowd. The British aristocrats and European collectors looked at Fiona with newfound respect, while the delegation from the André and Carter families stood frozen in absolute terror. Mason felt the ground slide out from beneath his feet. Fiona Vance, the woman he had treated as a pastime to cure his boredom, the woman he had offered to keep as a hidden mistress because she wasn't worthy of the André family name. She was the granddaughter of Julian Vance. Her family's wealth and influence made the André family look like insignificant peasants. Fiona, Mason said, taking a desperate step forward, his hands trembling. Fiona, please. I didn't know.
You was lied to.
Chris lied to me about everything. Fiona looked at him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vengeful. She looked at him with the cold, detached curiosity one might reserve for an insect. You knew enough, Mason, Fiona said softly. You knew my mother was dying and you used a fake marriage license to keep me quiet. You knew I was pregnant and you forced me to drink at your wedding. Mason's heart stopped. Pregnant? You were pregnant. I was, Fiona said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent room. 2 months. I lost the baby the day my mother died, while you were celebrating your union with the Carter family. A collective gasp went through the gallery. The patrons looked at Mason and Chris with utter disgust. Chris's face turned white. She took a step back, realizing the sheer scale of the disaster that had just unfolded. She's lying. She's just trying to ruin us. The medical records have already been verified, Mrs. André, Fiona said, her voice remaining entirely calm. And so has the theft of my mother's pendant. Security. 2 of the guards stepped forward, blocking Chris's path. Chris Carter, Fiona said, her gaze dropping to the gemstone around Chris's neck. You are currently wearing stolen property. The police are waiting outside. You can't do this. Chris screamed as the guards seized her arms. Do you know who my father is? The Carter family will destroy you. The Carter family is currently facing an emergency audit by the British tax authorities, Julian Vance said smoothly. And as of 10 minutes ago, the Vance Group has officially purchased 60% of the Carter family's outstanding
debt.
By tomorrow morning, Your father will be bankrupt. You have no family to save you, girl. Chris screamed, struggling against the guards as they dragged her out of the
Gallery.
Her diamonds clattered against the floor, her high society facade completely shattered. Only Mason remained. He stood alone in the center of the gallery, surrounded by hundreds of people, who looked at him as if he were a monster. Fiona, he whispered, tears finally streaming down his face. Fiona, please. I loved you. I really did. Those 5 years, they weren't a lie. I was stupid. I was blind, but I loved you. He fell to his knees, ignoring his expensive suit, ignoring the crowd, ignoring his dignity. He reached out, trying to touch the hem of her gown. I can divorce her, Mason begged, his voice cracking. I'll give you everything. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. Just give me one more chance. Please, Fiona. Fiona stepped back, easily avoiding his touch. She looked down at him, her expression peaceful, almost serene. Mason, she said softly, do you remember what you told me the night before? Your wedding. Mason froze, his eyes wide with fear. You told me to choose wisely, Fiona murmured. And I did. I chose my future.
I
Chose my art. And I chose to leave you behind in the dirt. She turned her back on him, walking toward her grandfather. Thomas. Julian Vance called out to his assistant. Please have this man removed. He is spoiling the aesthetic of the gallery. 2 security guards seized Mason by the shoulders, lifting him from the floor. He didn't struggle. He was hollowed out, a ghost of a man. As they dragged him toward the exit, his eyes remained locked on Fiona's back. He had traded a priceless diamond, a woman who would have loved him through poverty, sickness, and struggle for a handful of broken glass. And now he had neither. The next morning, the news of the André and Carter families' downfall dominated the global financial columns. The Carter Group declared bankruptcy by noon, their assets seized to cover their massive debts. Chris Carter was formally charged with theft and public defamation, her reputation ruined beyond repair. The André Group's stock plummeted to near zero as the Vance Group pulled all shipping contracts, leaving the company completely isolated in the domestic market. Mason André was removed from his position as CEO by his own board of directors. He was left with nothing but a crumbling apartment and a mountain of debt, destined to spend the rest of his life remembering the 5 years he had thrown away. In the gardens of Vance Manor, the autumn sun finally broke through the clouds, casting a warm, golden light over the damp grass. Fiona stood by the stone balustrade, looking out over the hills. In her hand, she held the gemstone pendant. The police had returned it to her that morning. She looked at the delicate emerald, then gently placed it around her own neck. It's over, Beatrice, Fiona whispered to the wind. We are home. She felt a soft breeze ruffle her hair. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel the dull, suffocating pain in her chest. The wounds had not disappeared. They would always be a part of her, but they had closed, leaving behind a strength that nothing could ever break again. She picked up her sketchbook, turned to a clean, white page, and began to draw the horizon.